Before the entire weaving room, Ambrose Vale emptied Eleanor Rook's pay envelope onto the cutting table. It held no money. A folded deed slid across the scarred oak and stopped against her hand. Blackthorn Ropewalk, Vale announced. Building, ground, and every useful thing upon it. That settles the account between us. The looms had been stopped for the noon oiling, yet the room still seemed to tremble with their remembered thunder. Nearly 60 women stood between hanging belts and gray ranks of machines. Nobody laughed at first. Then Vale looked toward his overseer, and the man gave a dutiful bark of amusement. 2 others followed. Eleanor kept her palm on the deed. For 12 years she had worked under the arrangement Vale had made after her mother's illness. Meals, a bed in the women's house, and 2 shillings each week for necessities, with the balance entered to her credit until the old medical debt was cleared. 3 months earlier, the mill bookkeeper had admitted that the debt had been repaid in 1868. Including skilled work bonuses, Vale still owed her £94 and 8 shillings. This morning, the page bearing that figure had disappeared. The Ropewalk has been closed for 19 years, Eleanor said. Then you will enjoy the quiet. Vale smiled for the workers. At 46, he had the pink, polished look of a man who never entered the carding room when the dust was high. You objected to my figures. Now, you may keep your own books. Isaac Turn, the old mechanic, lowered his eyes. Marion Holt, a 17-year-old bobbin carrier, had gone white with anger. But Eleanor checked her with the smallest shake of her head. Vale wanted an outburst. Under the master and servant laws, he had used smaller acts of defiance to ruin people. And if I refuse it? Eleanor asked. You leave without settlement and without a character. That meant no respectable mill in the West Riding would employ her. Her place in the women's house ended with her work. The 2 choices were not choices at all, and everyone in the room knew it. Eleanor unfolded the deed. It transferred Blackthorn Ropewalk and its narrow strip of river frontage to her outright, subject to parish rates and existing rights. A red wax seal hung from a faded cord. Someone had pressed a peculiar device into the wax. A knot stopped 1 turn before completion, its 2 loose ends pointing apart. Her thumb went still. When Eleanor was a child, her mother had taught her to judge flax in darkness and hemp through gloves. Margaret Rook could tell by touch whether a strand had been retted too long, spun against its natural twist, or strained past safe use. She had also taught Eleanor never to trust a finished knot until she understood how it had been made. An unfinished knot tells the truth, she used to say. It shows every choice. Completion can hide a fault. Margaret had drawn that exact open knot on scraps she kept locked in her sewing box. Vale mistook Eleanor's silence for surrender. Sign the receipt. She read every line before she did. The receipt acknowledged property and settlement of the disputed wage balance. It did not name a sum, and it did not release claims based on fraud. Vale's mouth tightened when she crossed out 3 words that said final and complete. He could have stopped her, but too many workers were watching. A ruin for a troublesome woman, he said after she signed. Perhaps you are well matched. Eleanor folded the deed around its seal. Perhaps we are. By 4 o'clock she had packed her clothes, her mother's ashwood shuttle, a small knotting fid, 2 combs, and the 9 pence remaining in her purse. Mrs. Lyle, keeper of the women's house, allowed her one night to remove the box but would not meet her gaze. Vale had already sent word that anyone offering Eleanor lodging might lose mill business. Blackthorn Ropewalk lay half a mile beyond Alderwick, between the old canal road and Alderbeck. Dusk flattened the moorland colors as Eleanor walked toward it. The property was longer than she remembered, 420 feet of stone-end rooms, joined to a timber-framed spinning gallery, narrow as a ship laid on land. Slate had fallen from 2 sections of roof. Nettles covered the towpath gate, and the river wall bowed outward where alder roots had entered the joints. At the eastern end, A squat tar house leaned beneath a blackened chimney. A blue parish notice had been nailed to the door. £9 14 in rates were due within 30 days. If they remained unpaid, the property could be offered for sale. Vale had given her a building that would circle back to him before winter. The door yielded only after she lifted it on its hinges. Inside, the long gallery smelled of wet timber, mouse nests, and the ghost of tar. Evening entered through roof holes in pale columns. The old rope-making wheels were gone. Floorboards had been taken from the middle bays, leaving dark pits between joists. Eleanor moved carefully along the stone edge. She was searching for one room dry enough to sleep in when her fingers brushed a shallow carving beneath the first crossbeam. She raised her lantern. An unfinished knot had been cut into the oak. She found the same mark under the next beam, and the next. 36 beams disappeared into darkness, each bearing the open knot her mother had once drawn. Beneath the ninth, pale curls of oak lay on the floor. A blade had recently scraped across the carving, trying to remove it. Someone had entered before her. Someone who knew the marks mattered, but not enough to understand why. The wind pressed through the broken roof. Far down the gallery, a door struck once and fell quiet. Eleanor closed her hand around the deed. Vale had called the place worthless. He had also arranged to recover it in 30 days. Those two facts could not both be true. She wedged the outer door with a beam fragment and spent her first night in the old counting room, where the ceiling remained mostly sound. Rain began after midnight. Drops found their way through cracked slate and tapped the floor with patient irregularity. Eleanor did not sleep. She wrapped herself in her coat, kept the lantern low to save oil, and listened for footsteps beneath the rain. At dawn, she inspected what she owned. The western stone block held the counting room, a ruined store, and a loft reached by a ladder with 3 missing rungs. The spinning gallery ran east toward the tar house, its beams set 12 feet apart. A narrow drainage channel followed the north wall before vanishing under the last 6 bays. The southern windows had been boarded from outside, though one board was recent pine among weathered oak. Beyond the tar house stood a brick wall with no visible door, and behind it the ground rose toward Vale's upper mill pond. The ruin had 3 immediate dangers. Water entered through at least 40 square feet of roof. The river wall had opened by 2 inches near its center. Most urgently, the western chimney shared a cracked stack with the counting room, making a fire unsafe. Eleanor had no money for slate, stone, or coal. She began with what required none. She cleared broken glass, tested each sound floorboard, and marked unsafe places with strips torn from an old sack. She lifted fallen slates from the nettles and sorted 11 that could be reused. In the counting room, she found an iron stove with a rusted door, a stool missing a leg, and 3 account drawers empty except for mouse-chewed hemp fibers. One fiber was not mouse bedding. It had been laid beneath a drawer runner in a flat braid of 4 strands, 2 hemp and 2 linen. A narrow red wool thread passed through its center. Eleanor rolled it between finger and thumb. The outer strands were old, but their twist remained even. The red thread was not decorative. It had been set where strain would expose it before the rope failed. She had seen her mother make small cords in the same manner, then pull them apart and begin again. A knock sounded against the wedged door. Marion Holt stood outside holding a covered bowl and a bundle of candle ends. "Mrs. Lyle said I would lose my place if I came. Will you?" "Probably." Marion tried to sound brave. Her father had been unable to work since a loom shuttle broke his wrist the previous spring, and her 4 shillings a week helped feed 2 younger brothers. "I brought broth. And Vale's clerk came here yesterday morning with Simon Mott and a crowbar. They were back before the hearing." Mott was Vale's private clerk, a thin man who carried keys to every mill building. "Did they take anything?" "I couldn't see. Mr. Vale has been meeting a railway gentleman. They walked the canal road and kept pointing here." Eleanor let her in, then showed her the carved marks. Marion saw only identical knots. Eleanor saw more now that daylight reached them. Every loose end pointed either east or west. A short nick appeared beside some loops, while others had 2 or 3. The marks were not copies. They were variations concealed inside repetition. "Can you read them?" Marion asked. "Not yet. Your mother could have." Eleanor looked at her sharply. "My father remembers her. He said Margaret Rook worked here before I was born. Vale told everyone she was only a cleaner. Eleanor had been 6 when the Ropewalk closed. Her memories of that year were fragments. Her mother's hands smelling of hemp oil, men arguing behind a door, a coil of new rope burning in the yard, and Ambrose's father standing at their cottage table with an account book. Margaret had never spoken freely about Blackthorn afterward. She had taken weaving work at Vale's mill and guarded her knowledge as if knowledge itself could be seized for debt. They ate broth from the same bowl. Before Marion left, Eleanor made her promise not to return during mill hours and gave her the candle ends she could spare. Help that cost Marion her place would solve nothing. At noon the parish rate collector arrived. Mr. Abel Crowther was not unkind, but he had a schedule and a stamped notice. He confirmed that Vale had paid the prior year's rates, then refused the current quarter after transferring the property. The parish could grant no extension beyond November 14. "Who buys such places at a rate sale?" Eleanor asked. Crowther looked toward the upper mill chimney. "Usually the neighbor with ready money." After he left, Eleanor examined the river wall. Repairing it properly would require a mason, lime, stone, and scaffolding. For now, brush and silt blocked the old drainage channel, forcing roof water toward the weakest section. She spent 3 hours opening the channel with a broken shovel blade. When water finally ran toward the beck, it carried a bundle of blackened cord from beneath the tar house. The cord contained the same red inner thread. That evening she mapped the first 12 beam marks on the back of a Vale packing label. East pointing ends became rising strokes. West pointing ends falling ones. The side nicks looked like counts, but the sequence produced nothing she understood. Near midnight, metal touched the outer lock. Eleanor extinguished the candle and stood behind the counting room door with the knotting fid in her hand. A key turned, stopped against her wooden wedge, then turned again. Someone pushed once, cautiously. She heard breathing and the soft scrape of a boot. "The rate notice is plain enough," Simon Mott whispered from outside. "She cannot last a month." Another man answered too quietly to recognize. The key withdrew. Their steps faded toward the canal road. In the morning, Eleanor found a clean knife cut across the wedge. They had not forced the door because they wanted their visit to remain secret. She needed a lock they did not possess, a roof patch, food, and £9 14 shillings. Mystery would have to wait upon survival. Eleanor carried the braided drawer cord to the canal wharf. The first carter she approached dismissed it as old string. The second, Ned Harland, examined the red thread before handing it back. He repaired boat fittings and cart gear in a shed beside the lock. One trace on his delivery cart had split near the buckle, and the replacement he had ordered from Leeds would not arrive for a week. "Can you make a serviceable splice?" he asked. "One that will show before it fails." He studied her narrow hands, scarred at the thumb from years of loom work. "With what rope?" "The sound length from your other trace, if you trust me to lay both as a pair." Eleanor worked in his shed for 2 hours. She separated the outer yarns, rejected the brittle ones, and respun the remaining hemp around red wool drawn from the edge of her shawl. Her mother's fid opened the strands without cutting them. She set both traces to equal length and finished each splice with the last turn left visible until Ned had watched her test it under a loaded axle. He paid her 1 shilling 8 pence and gave her an old lock with its only key. "Your splice is cleaner than the work from Leeds," he said. "Then send me the next one." By week's end, Eleanor had repaired 3 cart traces, 2 tow lines, a bell rope, and a set of harness reins. She earned 7 shillings and 6pence, enough for bread, lamp oil, nails, and a square of roofing felt. Ned helped her cover the worst roof opening in return for a new mooring line she promised to make when she obtained hemp. They worked only above the counting room. The rest would wait for money and dry weather. Isaac's turn came on the 6th morning. He stood inside the new lock without removing his cap. Ashamed of the duplicate key Vale had once made him fit. "I should have spoken at the hearing," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Because I am 61. My wife is ill, and Vale owns the cottage where we live." Cowardice becomes very sensible when it has another person's face attached to it. Eleanor understood that too well to condemn him. She showed him the braided cord, but not her map. Isaac's missing little finger bent the remaining ones into a permanent hook as he touched the splice. "Your mother called that the witness core," he said. Red showed through before a line parted. "She began it after your father died at Harker Quarry." Hoist rope snapped. 3 men fell with him. Eleanor had been told Samuel Rook died of fever. The room narrowed around her. Why did she lie? To keep you from hating rope, perhaps? Or to keep Vale from knowing what she taught you? Isaac looked along the beams. Those marks were covered by a plank ceiling when the place worked. "I helped nail it up." Josiah Blackthorne ordered the carvings first, but Margaret told him where each belonged. He could not read them. Rope makers had used marks to identify crews, lengths, and twist, but Margaret had combined them with a weaving draft. Isaac remembered her walking the gallery with squared paper and a carpenter's awl. Eleanor took out her map. "A draft does not make a picture until the repeats are placed against one another." She copied the 12 marks again in 2 rows of 6, then a third. When she treated east and west tails as warp over and warp under, the nicks became counts. Dark and light squares emerged on the page, not letters intervals. 12, 24, 36. Every third beam. At beams 3, 6, and 9, Eleanor found a second mark high on the north face, hidden from the floor. Beam 12 held none because someone had scraped it away. She climbed the ladder while Isaac steadied it and inspected the mortise. A sliver of red wool had been pressed under the wooden peg. The pattern did not point along the floor. It measured upward, through the joints of the building itself. That afternoon, Ambrose Vale arrived in a closed carriage. He remained on the dry strip near the gate, polished boots clear of the mud. A railway surveyor waited behind him with rolled plans. "You have made a spirited attempt," Vale said. "I am prepared to give you £5 for the deed and forgive the rates." Eleanor had not told anyone outside the Ropewalk what she had found. Yet his offer had risen from nothing to £5 in 6 days. "You said the property settled £94 and 8 shillings. A generous valuation at the time. Then I would be a fool to sell it for 5. The surveyor hid a smile. Vale did not. "The parish will sell it for less when your month expires. Then you may bid with everyone else." His gaze moved to the patched roof, the new lock, and Isaac standing in the doorway. For the first time, his confidence showed a seam. "Your mother spent her life mistaking cleverness for station," he said. It left her with nothing. Eleanor thought of the red thread hidden inside a cord, invisible until danger pulled it into view. "You came here to buy the building, Mr. Vale." "That does not look like nothing." He left without answering. Eleanor waited until the carriage was out of sight before allowing herself to breathe. Vale's last remark had done what he intended. It had opened an old wound and pressed hard. For years, she had believed Margaret's secrecy came from defeat. Now every beam suggested that her mother had left something unfinished on purpose. The remaining marks required a safer way to reach the rafters. Ned built a movable trestle from sound floorboards in exchange for 4 repaired lifting slings. Over the next 3 days, Eleanor and Isaac copied every carving before more could be damaged. The pattern changed after beam 18. The loose ends still pointed east or west, but the side nicks repeated in groups of 8, the usual number of shafts in the complex damask drafts Margaret had taught her. Eleanor laid the marks on squared paper, reversed every second row, and followed the over and under sequence. It produced a long diagonal ending at beam 33 beside the tar house. A second, shorter line rose from it, like the edge of an arch. "It is not a sentence," she said. "It is a construction. Instruction." Behind the last bays, the drainage channel entered a wall that appeared solid. She cleared soot and flaking lime from the bricks. Most bore the smoke stains of decades, but an arched section near the floor was cleaner and laid in a slightly narrower bond. Someone had bricked up an opening, then built the tar hearth in front of it. Isaac pressed his ear to the wall and tapped. The center answered, with a shallow echo. "There was a proofing room," he said slowly. "Blackthorn tested haulage ropes where broken strands couldn't strike the men. I thought it had been filled when Vale's father closed the works. They did not break through. The arch carried part of the chimney weight, and careless removal could bring several tons of masonry down upon them." Eleanor marked the joints and returned to work that would pay. Orders had begun to come from carters who saw Ned's traces. She bought 12 pounds of rough hemp on credit, combed it by hand, and used 2 salvaged hooks to lay short cords down the sound end of the gallery. Marion turned the wheel before and after mill shifts. Eleanor recorded every ounce of fiber and every hour worked. When she paid Marion 6 pence from the first sale, the girl stared at the coin. "You need this for the rates. You worked for it. Money that belongs to someone else is not mine to keep." The sentence was simple. Saying it aloud showed Eleanor how distorted life at Vale's mill had become. Ned introduced her to Arthur Fenley, a solicitor whose office occupied 2 rooms above the baker's shop. Fenley was 37, careful in speech, and burdened with more papers than shelves. He could not take a complicated property action without a fee, but he agreed to read the transfer because Vale's proposed railway siding would affect several canal tradesmen he represented. Fenley examined the wax seal through a round lens. "This is not Vale's device. It is the old Blackthorn mark, an unfinished knot." "So I see. The parchment is recent, but the seal was lifted from an earlier instrument and attached by the old cord. Sloppy theater. Legally unnecessary." He pointed to a clause in the deed. "More interesting are these existing rights. Your river frontage is conveyed, but no water easement is described. The 1,855 rate map shows 1. Vale's mill now uses the upper channel it served. Could he have removed it? Not merely with ink. There should be a release, a sale, or a court order. I found none in the local index." Fenley wrote to the county registry for older abstracts and advised Eleanor to preserve every mark before opening the wall. He also warned her that possession of a secret room would prove nothing by itself. Documents needed an origin, signatures, witnesses, and a path showing how they came to be there. "And first," he said, "you must remain owner long enough to find them." The rate money stood at £1, 11 shillings, and 4 pence. Vale moved against her livelihood the next day. A notice appeared at the wharf claiming that cord made at Blackthorn had never passed an official load test and might endanger horses and men. No official had signed it. Even so, 2 carters withdrew their orders. Eleanor carried one of her tow lines to the public weighbridge. With Ned and the weighman as witnesses, she looped it through the iron frame and loaded it gradually with sacks of sand. At twice its working strain, the red core appeared at 1 splice. The rope remained intact. She cut it open afterward, showing where the warning thread had shifted before the hemp failed. The weighman signed the result. Ned ordered 6 more lines. That night, the new lock was forced. Eleanor and Marion had gone to Mrs. Holt's cottage for supper. When they returned, the counting room drawers lay on the floor, and her copied beam map was missing from beneath the stove brick. The deed remained inside her dress pocket. In the gallery, fresh tool marks scarred beam 33, and a cold chisel lay beneath it stamped V and S, the mark used in Vale's repair shop. Whoever searched had taken the map but misunderstood it. Eleanor had reversed alternate rows as a weaver would, read straight. The pattern led to the roof above beam 27. By morning, someone had removed 3 slates there and found only bird nests. Eleanor made a second copy from memory and stored it with Fenley. Then she, Isaac, and Ned built a timber brace beneath the tar house arch. They removed 1 brick at a time, numbering each so the opening could be rebuilt. On the 3rd evening, a wedge of air breathed through the mortar. It smelled not of rot, but of linseed oil and dry hemp. The chamber beyond was 9 feet wide and ran beneath the eastern stone block. Its brick walls had been coated in pitch, its ceiling lined with sheet tin. A hand-cranked testing frame occupied the center, with an iron drum at one end and a rack of graduated weights at the other. Coils of rope hung from wooden pegs, gray with age but protected from damp by waxed cloth. Each carried a brass plate punched with a date, a strain, and the initials M.R. Margaret Rook had not cleaned this room. She had directed its work. Eleanor lifted the nearest packet with both hands. Inside lay 6-inch rope sections cut after tests. Red witness threads showed at measured depths. Some were scarcely visible. Others had migrated to the surface beneath strain. A notebook rested on a sloping desk, its pages ruled like weaving drafts. Margaret's handwriting filled the margins with fiber counts, weather notes, and corrections. The first dated entry was March 1851, 2 months after Samuel Rook died. Margaret had recorded the failed quarry rope. An uneven heart, tar masking inner rot, no outward warning before separation. The next pages described 3 years of experiments to make hidden damage visible. Josiah Blackthorne paid for hemp, weights, and trials. Isaac and 7 other workers signed as witnesses. Eleanor sat on the brick floor. Grief came without tears at first. Her mother had carried Samuel's death, invented a way to prevent another, and then spent her remaining years letting Alderwick call her an ignorant mill woman. Near the back of the notebook, whole leaves had been cut away. A rusted cash box stood open beneath the desk, empty, except for a torn corner of blue paper. On it, Margaret had written, "Trust, duplicate, acknowledged by E. Hollis, parish chest. Second proof remains with the drum." Eleanor examined the iron testing drum. Its axle had fused with rust, and its bolted end plate would not move. A narrow slot in the rim was shaped for a flat key. No key remained in the room. The chamber enlarged the mystery but did not solve it. It proved Margaret's work and the existence of a stronger, safer rope. It did not establish who owned the process, why Vale feared it, or what trust Margaret had named. Ambrose arrived before they had finished replacing the bricks around the narrowed entrance. This time, he offered £20. When Eleanor refused, he produced a letter from his solicitor, asserting Vale and Sons' exclusive right to the upper channel and warning her not to operate machinery from Alderbeck. "I have no machinery operating from the water. Not yet." Vale looked past her to the chamber, where the testing frame was hidden behind canvas. "You have been disturbing a dangerous structure. The district surveyor may condemn the entire eastern block. Did your clerk tell you that?" Eleanor asked, holding up the stamped chisel. His eyes touched it and moved away. "Tools are easily stolen. So are wages." The warmth left his face. "You have until the rates fall due. After that, I will own the ground, and anything you imagine you have found will belong to me." Fenley's answer from the county registry arrived 2 days later. The abstract referred to an 1852 deed, creating a worker's beneficial interest in the Blackthorne premises, process, and watercourse. The original was not filed with the abstract. A later memorandum claimed the trust had been discharged in 1854, but it named no beneficiaries and bore only Nathaniel Vale's signature. "A man cannot release other people's rights by signing for himself," Fenley said. "But we need the trust deed, or a recognized duplicate, and proof it was never lawfully dissolved." The former parish clerk Edmund Hollis, had died 16 years earlier. The old parish chest had been moved during repairs to St. Jude's Vestry, where water damage destroyed many bundles. Fenley requested permission to inspect what remained, a process the church warden said might take weeks. Eleanor had 19 days. The first public proof of Margaret's invention came by accident, and it cost Eleanor the best evidence she possessed. Marian burst into the Ropewalk shortly after noon with blood on her sleeve. A hoisting line had parted at Vale's loading house. One end of the wool platform had dropped, pinning Daniel Holt against the wall 15 feet above the yard. A 14-year-old piecer named Toby had been left clinging to the opposite rail. Vale's men could not raise the platform because the spare rope showed mildew at its core. Eleanor took the longest preserved sample from the proofing room. Its brass plate read Mr. 16 September 1853, tested 62 CWT. She had planned to show it to an independent rope maker in Leeds. Once loaded and cut, its condition as an untouched sample would be gone. She carried it to the mill. Vale stood in the yard ordering everyone back, while his overseer proposed breaking through the loading house wall. Daniel's face had turned gray. Toby's hands were slipping. "That rope is mine," Vale said when he saw the brass plate. "Then prove it after we bring them down." Ned rigged the old sample through 2 sound pulleys. Eleanor inspected every fathom by touch, set a bridle beneath the dropped platform, and left the final turns of each knot open until the load had settled evenly. 20 workers hauled. The old rope stretched, the red witness thread surfacing near one eye splice, but it held. Toby reached the window first. Daniel could not move, so Eleanor ordered the men to lower the platform inch by inch to a wagon piled with wool. The line jammed at the last pulley. To release Daniel without shifting the load onto his crushed leg, Eleanor cut through the sample above the warning thread. Her mother's rope saved both lives and fell into the yard in 3 shortened pieces. Ambrose stepped over it without looking down. "Miss Rook entered against my instruction," he told the gathered workers. "Any consequence is hers." Isaac knelt beside the failed mill line. Its outer strands were newly tarred. Its inner heart crumbled between his fingers. "This should have been replaced last winter," he said loudly. Vale dismissed him before sunset. He dismissed Marian for abandoning her station and ordered the Holt family from their mill cottage at the end of the week. Eleanor had £4 3 saved toward the rates. She used 12 shillings to hire a cart and move the Holt's possessions into the dry western store at Blackthorn. She hired Marian at 5 shillings a week, though she could guarantee only the first fortnight. Isaac came too, after settling his wife with her sister. Eleanor had protected 2 workers, and Vale had made her responsible for 6 people. For the first time, however, the mill's silence no longer favored him. 30 witnesses had watched an unmarked Vale rope fail, and Margaret Rook's 19-year-old sample hold. The weighman displayed its severed red core beside his signed test. Orders came from 2 canal carriers and Harker Quarry. Ned advanced half the price of 12 tow lines, enough to replace the money Eleanor had spent. They worked in shifts. Isaac restored a hand wheel from discarded mill gears. Marian and her mother dressed fiber. Eleanor set twist, inspected splices, and maintained accounts that anyone could examine. Daniel Holt, his legs splinted, made labels from his bed in the store. With 5 days remaining, Eleanor carried £9 14 to Abel Crowther and received a stamped discharge of the rates. Vale could no longer recover Blackthorn at the parish sale. The blow came that night. No rain was falling in Alderwick, yet water rose 6 inches against the Ropewalk wall between midnight and 1. Vale's upper mill pond discharged through a sluice normally opened in measured stages. Someone had removed the regulating pin and lifted the gate fully. A brown surge entered the drainage channel, struck the bowed masonry, and tore out the joints Eleanor had cleared. Ned heard the wall crack. He woke the others, and they carried Daniel onto higher ground before the center section gave way. Water rushed beneath the gallery, lifting boards and rolling hemp bales against the supports. Eleanor ran toward the proofing room for Margaret's notebook. A beam dropped across the doorway, striking her shoulder and throwing her into the flooded channel. Isaac pulled her out with a line around her waist. The eastern 6 bays settled nearly a foot. Beam 24 split at its mortise. 3 marked crossbeams twisted beyond saving. And black water filled the hidden chamber to the level of the testing desk. By dawn, the beck had returned to its banks. The damage remained. Eleanor's left arm hung in a sling, fashioned from sacking. Half their raw hemp was spoiled. Margaret's notebook had swollen with muddy water, its ink feathering through the pages. The iron drum lay beneath fallen brick. The district surveyor arrived at 9 with Simon Mott, and a written complaint submitted before the flood occurred. Unless the gallery was braced within 48 hours, he would order the eastern end demolished for public safety. Remarkable timing, Fenley said when he read the hour on the complaint. Timing was not proof. Ned found the sluice pin downstream, newly sawed through rather than pulled. The iron bore the V&S stamp, but Vale would call that another stolen tool. No one had seen the gate opened. Eleanor stood beneath the sagging roof and looked at all that one night had undone. The rate receipt in her pocket proved she owned a failing building. It did not give her the 40 pounds a mason estimated for the river wall, or the timber needed before tomorrow night. Vale's railway surveyor had returned to town. An offer of 30 pounds waited at Fenley's office. She understood at last how her mother might have been driven into silence, not by one grand defeat, but by a sequence of necessities, each demanding the surrender of one small thing until nothing seemed left. Then Marion brought the squared paper copy of the beam marks. Mud stained its edge, but the pattern remained. "You said an unfinished knot shows every choice," she said. "This one isn't finished yet." Eleanor looked from the copied pattern to the ruined proofing room. 3 beams were gone. The notebook was damaged, and the rope sample had been cut. But they had mapped the marks, saved the deed, paid the rates, and preserved witnesses Vale did not control. "No," Eleanor said. "It isn't." The first task was not discovery but survival. Ned went to the canal carriers whose orders Eleanor had accepted and explained that, without emergency timber, Blackthorn could not deliver their lines. 2 firms advanced oak beams against future work. Harker Quarry sent 6 men because Daniel Holt and Toby were alive only through a rook-made rope. Even the district surveyor, once Simon Mott had departed, marked where the braces must stand and agreed to inspect them at sunset on the second day. No one offered miracles. They offered carts, hands, bolts, and 8-hour shifts. Eleanor, her shoulder bound tightly, directed from a stool with the beam map across her knees. Isaac knew which joints could carry temporary load. Ned set raking shores from the gallery to buried footings in the yard. By the deadline, the roof still sagged, and the river wall remained open. But the surveyor could not move any brace with his testing bar. He certified the structure safe from immediate collapse and prohibited only the last 6 bays. Vale's demolition order failed. They pumped the proofing room with buckets and a borrowed hand pump. Marion separated Margaret's wet notebook leaves with clean linen, laying them between boards under light pressure before drying them in the counting room. Some ink was lost, but the ruled diagrams survived. The iron drum had shifted off its cradle without opening. When mud was cleared from its rim, Eleanor saw the key slot again. She had searched the room, the desk, and every peg for a key. Her mother's note had not said a key remained there. It said the second proof remained with the drum. The copied beam pattern ended in a shape Eleanor had mistaken for an arch. Turned sideways, it resembled the long oval of a weaving shuttle, with 3 nicks at one end. She took Margaret's ashwood shuttle from her box. Its brass nose carried 3 shallow grooves darkened by old iron dust. Eleanor had handled it for 20 years without asking why a shuttle used only for wool needed a removable metal tip. The tip unscrewed. Beneath it was a flat steel tongue. It entered the drum slot, exactly. Isaac steadied the casing, while Ned used a bar on the rusted axle. The end plate turned a quarter circle and released an inner copper cylinder sealed with waxed flax. It was dry. Inside lay a parchment deed, a packet of letters, 2 account books, and a blue receipt bearing Edmund Hollis's parish stamp. The trust deed was dated the 8th of June, 1852. Josiah Blackthorne had conveyed the Ropewalk, its lower watercourse, the testing apparatus, and the use of Margaret Rook's witness corps process to 3 trustees. Income was to provide fair wages, relief for workers injured in rope-making, and support for the families of men killed by failed haulage lines. Margaret was named superintendent of testing and a trustee in her own right. If the original workforce dispersed, her lawful heir could preserve the process and nominate new trustees, provided the property continued its stated public use. Eleanor read that clause twice. It did not make her a rich woman. It made her responsible for a purpose. The account books showed that Harker Quarry and 4 canal carriers had paid licensing fees for witness corps rope between 1,852 and 1,854. Nathaniel Vale, then Blackthorne's factor and lender, collected the payments. The last entries, written by Margaret, recorded sums received but never deposited into the workers' relief account. A letter from Josiah demanded their return. Another described Vale's threat to foreclose on a loan Blackthorne had already repaid. The final letter was Margaret's, written to Edmund Hollis after the building had been seized. She explained that Nathaniel Vale's men were removing records and burning test stock. Josiah and the workers had concealed the proofing room before seeking an injunction. The beam marks were a map that only someone trained in Margaret's weaving method could reverse correctly. Hollis acknowledged a duplicate of the trust deed for the parish chest. Before the petition could be heard, Josiah died after a winter lung illness. Nathaniel accused Margaret of stealing company papers and threatened to place 8-year-old Eleanor in the workhouse while the charge was tried. Margaret surrendered her key and entered Vale's employment, but she did not release the trust. She kept the shuttle. Her last line to Hollis was cramped but legible. If my daughter ever holds the door in her own name, the choice must be hers. Do not burden a child with a fight. She cannot yet survive. Eleanor lowered the letter. Her mother's silence had not been shame, it had been shelter. Fenley arrived from St. Jude's the following morning, carrying a tin document case mottled with rust. Most of the parish chest had indeed been ruined, but Hollis had placed the trust copy and witness declarations inside the case. The copy had lost its lower seal to damp. The original from the drum supplied the intact seals. The parish copy supplied an independent chain of custody. Their wording matched, down to a corrected boundary measurement initialed by all 3 trustees. Isaac's name appeared among the witnesses. So did that of Alice Dunn, a rope dresser now living with her daughter in Leeds. Fenley sent a man to locate her. Harker Quarry still possessed 2 invoices, bearing the same open knot device and Nathaniel Vale's receipt signature. The different clues began to join. The wax seal on Eleanor's new deed had come from an unused Blackthorne impression kept in Vale's files. The carved knots preserved the location of the proofing room and identified Margaret's private drafting system. The red witness thread connected the notebook to surviving ropes and commercial invoices. The county abstract proved the trust had once been formally recognized. The parish copy and living witnesses proved it had not been invented inside a newly discovered room. Vale's attempt to make the transfer look ceremonial had placed the old seal in Eleanor's hand. His effort to settle her wage claim had given the trust's designated successor the one thing Margaret said she needed: lawful possession of the door. Fenley sought an injunction preventing Vale from entering Blackthorne, interfering with the watercourse, or completing the railway sale until the trust and accounts were examined. He also demanded Vale and Sons' rope, wage, and mill maintenance ledgers. The application was heard in the county hall before a judge who had no patience for speeches unsupported by paper. Alderwick filled the public benches. Vale arrived with 2 barristers and described himself as a victim of documents planted by a resentful former employee. His counsel argued that Margaret's process belonged to the business where she had developed it, that the trust had been dissolved, and that the flood resulted from an old sluice pin failing under ordinary pressure. Fenley did not begin with the secret room. He began with records Vale could not call planted. The 1852 county abstract, Harker Quarry's invoices, Hollis's parish register, and Vale and Son's own recent accounts. The mill books contained annual payments from 2 mines for rook warning cord, collected long after Blackthorn closed. Those sums had never appeared in the trust account. Vale's barrister claimed the words described an ordinary colored thread. Fenley placed the severed rescue rope and the failed mill hoist line before the court. The public weighman gave his results. Daniel Holt testified from a chair. Alice Dunn, found in Leeds, identified Margaret's test marks and her own signature on the trust copy. Isaac described watching Nathaniel Vale remove the records in 1854 and helping Margaret conceal the chamber. Then Simon Mott asked to be heard. Vale had dismissed him that morning and accused him of stealing the chisel found at Blackthorn. Mott produced the clerk's duplicate of a letter Vale had dictated 3 weeks earlier. It ordered Mott to remove the rook symbols before the railway's final inspection and to locate any documents connected with the old water right. Mott admitted entering the Ropewalk and scraping beam 9. He also admitted delivering a replacement sluice pin to Vale on the afternoon before the flood. "Did you open the gate?" the judge asked. Mott swallowed. Mr. Vale ordered the night engineer to raise it. He said the old wall would wash out and the parish would condemn the ground. "I prepared the safety complaint before the gate was opened." The judge looked toward Vale. "You knew the wall would fail? A frightened clerk will say anything to save himself. Then perhaps your maintenance ledger will reassure us." The ledger did the opposite. It recorded the old pin as sound during an inspection 4 days earlier. A later line, squeezed into the margin in different ink, called it defective. Vale had always trusted paper when it served him. He had kept too much of it to escape when the paper was read by someone outside his control. The judge granted the injunction, recognized a substantial case that the trust remained in force, and ordered an independent accounting. Control of the watercourse passed temporarily to a court-appointed engineer. The railway company withdrew its offer rather than purchase disputed ground. Evidence concerning the sluice and altered wage books was referred to the county magistrates for criminal inquiry. The full reckoning took months, not minutes. Auditors found that Vale and Son had concealed wage balances for 11 women, diverted licensing fees, and charged the Blackthorn Trust for repairs never made. The court confirmed the original trust and Eleanor's right to act as successor trustee, subject to 2 additional trustees chosen by the beneficiaries. Vale and Son was ordered to restore the diverted money, pay Eleanor's documented wage balance, and meet the cost of repairing the river damage. Creditors removed Ambrose from management. He later pleaded guilty to falsifying business accounts. The sabotage charge remained contested, but the civil judgment left him liable for the damage his instructions caused. Eleanor did not watch him leave Alderwick. She was at Blackthorn measuring the broken river wall with the engineer. £94 and 8 shillings finally entered her account, but she did not spend it as if restitution were a prize. She reserved a year's modest living costs, paid Fenley's fees, and placed the remainder into the rebuilding fund alongside the recovered trust money. The engineer rejected Vale's cheap patching method and designed a stepped stone wall with drainage openings behind it. Work began at the foundation and lasted through winter. The Ropewalk returned 1 section at a time. First came the western roof and a safe stove. Next came 12 gallery bays, glazed windows, and a raised hemp store above flood level. The eastern block remained braced until spring, when masons rebuilt the proofing room arch and set the iron drum back on its cradle. No one pretended 420 feet of neglected structure could be restored in a season. An independent testing house in Leeds, examined Margaret's surviving samples and Eleanor's new lines. Eleanor improved the warning core by setting 2 red wool threads at different depths. The first appeared when a rope should be taken out of heavy service. The second marked immediate danger. Harker Quarry ordered haulage lines under the name Rook Witness Rope. Canal carriers followed after the first winter's tests. Blackthorn employed 6 people by the summer of 1,874 and 14 by the following spring. Wages were paid in cash every Friday. Deductions, when workers chose to contribute to the relief fund, appeared in a separate book that remained open on the counting room desk. No debt for housing could swallow a wage without the worker seeing and signing every entry. Marian learned accounts from Eleanor and mechanical drawing from Isaac. She devised a clearer tag showing when each line had been laid, tested, and inspected. Daniel Holt recovered enough to manage the hemp store from a high stool. Mrs. Holt supervised dressing and hired 2 women Vale's mill had dismissed as too old. Isaac became testing master, though he claimed retirement every Monday and returned every Tuesday. Ned's boat shed supplied thimbles, hooks, and fittings. He and Eleanor argued cheerfully over tolerances and shared supper more often as the months passed, but neither treated affection as another debt requiring settlement. They had both lived long enough to let trust be built, like the river wall from sound courses, inspected as they rose. Some people in Alderwick never admitted they had been wrong. Mrs. Lyle crossed the road rather than pass Eleanor. 2 mill overseers called Blackthorn a charity until the quarry contracts were posted. Others changed because they had watched Eleanor keep accounts fairly, risk her evidence to save 2 lives, and rebuild without using the recovered money for display. That distinction mattered to her. On the first day the full gallery reopened in May 1875, sunlight traveled through the southern windows from beam 1 to beam 36. The surviving open-knot carvings had been cleaned but not deepened. Where 3 flood-damaged beams had been replaced, Marian had asked whether the marks should be copied onto the new oak. Eleanor said no. False age would make them decoration. Instead, small brass plates recorded what had been lost and why. The opening ceremony was brief. Alice Dunn cut a plain hemp cord across the door. The Injured Workers Fund paid its first grant to the widow of a quarryman from another town, a woman who had never heard of Margaret Rook. That, more than the speeches, fulfilled the trust. After the visitors left, Eleanor walked the length of the gallery alone. Wheels turned at measured speed. Hemp fibers caught the afternoon light. At the testing frame, Marian loaded a new line while Isaac watched the dial, and Ned checked the fittings. Near the counting room, Eleanor's mother's shuttle rested inside a glass-fronted box, its brass key visible beside Margaret's letter. It was no longer a secret object. Anyone could read why it mattered. Eleanor stopped beneath the 9th beam. The old knot was incomplete, scarred where Mott's chisel had crossed it. She once would have seen only damage. Now she could see the choices that remained visible because the knot had never been closed over them. From the loading door came the smell of rain on stone. The rebuilt wall sent water cleanly through its drains, instead of holding pressure in darkness. Workers called measurements to one another down the long room, and each answer returned without fear. Eleanor placed her hand on the first finished coil of Rook Witness rope. A single red thread showed deliberately at its cut end, bright against the hemp. Her mother had been forced to hide truth inside walls, tools, and fiber. Eleanor's work would carry it in the open.